Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever, whenever, or however you are listening. I am John Ramos, and welcome to Everyday Magic, your source for your daily dose of magic. This podcast is an idea that I had to the growing popularity of MTG Magic the Gathering and the seemingly endless possibilities to increase the supply of content. However, most casts that you hear or that are in the Magic community today are once a week, and sometimes only touch on a very limited list of topics, sometimes even overlapping. Instead, the idea I wanted to present with this cast is doing it daily, but with a shorter time frame. Most casts you hear sometimes are an hour, hour and a half. I've even seen casts that are 2 hours, and sometimes listeners don't have time to do that 2 hours in one day. Sometimes it takes a while, but this way I can present a 20, 30, maybe 40-minute episode, and it's a daily thing, and obviously it won't be on weekends or holidays, of course, but that was the idea that I wanted to present. The cast will be something, we'll have 2 segments, a daily headline list from what's happening in Magic, almost like a news report, where we discuss them in short order, give some feedback back and forth. Of course, I'd have to have a second and third host if I wanted to, but until then, I will run down the list as a report or what I feel about that specific topic. The second segment is what I would call the fun section, where we take in listener support mail, have guests, pop culture, predictions about Magic and its, or even sometimes not even Magic related, etc., but mainly etc. So let's have some fun. A little about me. We'll start with that first. I've been playing Magic since right around when the Dark was midway in release, almost close to being right around that time frame with Revised and Fallen Empire. That time frame. I got started by a tournament at a toy convention that my father was a part of. He was selling toys. That's what he used to do a while back, was selling G.I. Joes and all these limited edition type stuff. And then his wife, my stepmother's brother, my step uncle, was a very avid player, and he was playing in one of the tournaments there. And I saw the cards, and I said to myself that, the art's really cool looking, and this was, very different for the time. So, and I was about 8 or 9, I think, and the art was just really cool. And I saw one of the cards. It was from Fallen Empires, from Arabian Nights. It was Ali from Cairo, and that's still one of my, if not the favorite that I still have to this day. But that's a little about me in my Magic time frame. I've played off and on for 20 or so odd years, and I still play today, and I actually got full-fledged into the Magic Arena craze. So I also stream on Azrael the Great 23 is my handler, and follow me on Twitter at Azrael the Great 1. But that's a little bit about me. The first segment, we'll get to the headlines. On the docket today, Standard is booming, MTG event attendance is dropping, the pros are upset, but we'll start with Modern. Modern has seen such a dramatic shift since the release of Modern Horizons. Initially, the set seemed not too exciting overall, with some cards having potential to be seen and used in Modern. However, after nearly 2 months since the set's release, Magic Online having results, and some major events, Hogak and Friends has swept the Magic community, even causing Bridge from Below to get banned. Is Modern dying right before our eyes, or is this a case of seeing brighter horizons in the future? I'd first like to point out that, one, I haven't touched Modern in years. The last time I played Modern was when Blue-White Tron was a thing with talismans and stuff like that, like way back when the first Ravnica. However, I've seen Modern evolve to what it is now, and when WotC banned Summer Bloom and Splinter Twin and all these archetypes and these cards, that it was supposed to be a turn 4 format, and they weren't even wanting to have it that. Today, however, it is putting 14, 16, and 18 power worth of creatures on the table, on the battlefield, and you're dead on turn 3, theoretically on turn 2, and sometimes there's even a deck out there in Neo form that does it on turn 1. So it's not that I don't think Modern is dying. However, I do think that there is going to be a Modern banning. Most of the pros that you talk to or you see on Twitter, most of them are already on the verge right now that at the very least, Hogak's getting banned. And some even disagree that since it was in a new set and a relatively new one, that Faithless Looting should go. Either way, there's going to be a banning. I wouldn't suggest that Hogak gets banned. However, WotC has continuously and sometimes negligently put cards in the format that are breaking the rules of it. In other words, look at the ban list and how many of them are free spells. Free spells cheating on mana is something that we deal with that in a way that is, there's no way to say it. It's not fair. Faithless Looting is just a draw to discard to, and it has flashback. Of course, most players will tell you that it does unfair things, and that's all you're trying to do with it. But your enabler doesn't stop you. Like, for example, I like to backtrack. The main problem with Modern is the combo effect, is the combo decks, and they do everything under the sun, and it's a non-interactive format, and it's all about the graveyard. Of course, Faithless Looting, and some even suggest that Faithless Looting is it's almost becoming like a brainstorm the brainstorm effect in Legacy, except now it's in Modern. Not every red deck runs Faithless Looting, i.e. Burn doesn't run Faithless Looting, and Jund sometimes most likely does not run Faithless Looting, and there are a couple other red decks or decks that run red that don't run the full package of 4 Faithless Looting. Sometimes they run 1, sometimes they run 2, sometimes they don't run them at all. The main thing I would just say is I don't think Modern is dying. However, if Wizards continuously sets the precedent of we're going to continuously make free spells, then this is where we're headed. Hogak is just the beginning. And the enabler isn't unfair or busted unless you continuously have unfair strategies or unfair cards in the format. Of course, some of the arguments would say, well, just ban the enabler and we don't have to worry about that. Probably true. However, if you're not printing free spells, for example, Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, Hogak, Golgari Grave Troll got banned, and that's where and Delve is a ridiculous mechanic too, and an unfair mechanic, and that's all you're doing with it. So I don't think Faithless Looting is as egregious as WotC continuously printing free spells and free creatures and allowing them to circumvent the mana. I think it's unfair, but that's where we're at. But in the competitive sense, the attendance is dropping. And speaking of competitive play, the professional community seems to be losing its players one by one. And from Sam Black to Steve Rubin, each moment has the MTG community wondering if the competitive Magic itself, at least on the paper side, is tapering off from the complete overhaul with the esports designation, arena, and MPL not having a specific achievement order to get on the train. What is it to be done with the sudden upheaval that is the direction that Magic is headed? I don't know what it is about the professional community, and they have their gripes. Sam Black posted a couple of tweets about how he doesn't see a place for him in Magic. Steve Rubin, similarly, quitting Magic or quitting professional Magic. Paul Rietzel posted on Twitter the same deal. And in fact, went as far to say that if Magic is going towards a more online type situation where paper and the social interaction is going away, that the position is that I'm paraphrasing here, that he would not allow his son to get into the game because it's going in a direction that he doesn't see fit. Firstly, Magic is a great game, and it's one of the greatest games out there. In fact, that has been cited as the most complicated and has surpassed Monopoly as the big money generated game of our lifetime. And regardless if it's online or on paper, I prefer online. Not everybody does. I prefer online in the sense that I don't have to leave my house. And the amount of money that you spend at an event, for example, if it's a weekend and it's a Mythic Championship or even an SCG event, you have to get up early on a Friday, or excuse me, on a Saturday, because that's when the open starts. You drive out there. Sometimes you fly. That's a cost. And then your hotels, your food, buying cards, etc. That all costs money. And the opens and sometimes the GPs, for example, I think are $100 a piece now at the main event. Most people just go to the side events now, or Magic Fest, excuse me, not considered GPs anymore. However, that's where, and then online is I go into an event and I only pay for the entry if that's what the entry is, unless I'm invited, or not me specifically, but unless you're invited. In that sense, you just cut all the costs. That's where the game is going. Now, what I will say, the social aspect of the game is the most drawing to it. Going to the event and seeing friends, family, stuff like that. But but the original question of what is to be done to the Sun upheaval of the direction that it's going. First of all, WotC needs to get the competitive achievement order in line. How do you make it to the MPL, and how do you get on the train, and how to get there? What are the steps, etc. Because right now there's no set way, there's no set criteria, there's no set anything. Anybody can get on there regardless if you got a lot of Twitch views. It's not based on merit, or at least that's what the community is complaining about. But that's the first thing. And once that's set, I think a lot of players will get into that position of, well, maybe now that there's a place to go, there's a way to get there, now I know how to do it. Today, it's not like that. I'm not going to point any names or say any names or point any fingers or elbows, but certain MPL members are said to not have the merit, don't have the views, and are just there to promote the game, which is most likely true. However, it's a great business decision for those who have taken the contracts that are handed out by WotC, and you'd be a fool not to. So, but that's the direction that needs to be hashed out, is can we get there, and how are we going to change it? And with the esports designation and how Arena has basically exploded the MTG popularity and the MPL seemingly getting less views, they need to figure out the MPL first, because that's where the future of Magic lies. Is they finally listened to pay the pros. However, not all the pros are, shall the community say, qualified. But either way, this is where we are. And speaking of Arena, which is the cash cow of WotC of today, Standard is booming, or really it's Arena. But Standard is usually the format that most players interact with, though we all know that Modern is the most popular, albeit recently taking a nosedive in attendance and also views on Twitch. Standard has been the most popular due to Arena and the ladder and all that comes with it. You have the chance of making it to the Mythic Championship. You have the Mythic qualifiers, hence, or still the same in that sense. Yet, Standard rotates soon with 4 sets going out. The Ixalan block, Dominaria block, that includes the M19 set. What should players be looking to keep in mind when rotation happens, and what decks seem to lose nothing in the October rotation? Currently, Tier 1 is set right now as Bant Scapeshift, Jund Dinosaurs, Feather, and Orzhov Vampires. And it's possible that a ramp strategy is also in there. However, the Tier 1 strategies really have a hard time with the Scapeshift deck. Right now, I think it's possible that the metagame is sort of like a rock, paper, scissors type deal, where Scapeshift is really, really good, and then you have the Dinosaur deck, and that beats, or typically beats, Scapeshift, and then what beats Dinosaurs is a lot of interaction. Esper deals with it very well, but Esper has a really hard time with ramp strategies, and some have suggested that Esper, the control version, is a lot better than the tempo one, and it's not even that good. I play personally Simic Ramp, and it's the deck that Brad Nelson originally wrote about in the first week or so of the after M20 release, and that's what I play. I made a couple of changes to it, not much. The main change is taking 2 Cerulean Drakes out and I think an Aether Gust for 3 Shifting Ceratops. A lot of blue decks just can't handle Ceratops. Ceratops is probably one of the top 5 cards to come out of M20, and it's really good for Standard. Another card that I think should be considered, a lot of the blue-green cards, to be honest, a lot of the Simic cards are really, really good. If you have a problem with Narset, just play Risen Reef. The only card that I have a really, really hard time or a really, really big problem with is Teferi, or 3 Fairy for some of those that are in the community. 3 Fairy is almost oppressive, and it gives game states that are just ridiculous. Because a lot of your 2 drops, your 3 drops, and your 4 drops are just absurd, and Teferi deals with all of them and bounces them. And most of the cards that you're playing don't really deal with it that well. Interaction is something that 3 Fairy doesn't allow. That's why playing counterspells is really not good, because if your metagame is full of Teferis, then negates Disdainful Strokes, absorbs, and all your counter magic, albeit if it's very, very slow counter magic in the 3, 4, and sometimes 2 casting cost. There are some decks like Simic Flash that some play Spell Pierce, Essence Scatter, Negate, Dovin's Veto, not in Simic Flash, but some tempo decks in the sense of Esper Tempo. And what I think should happen at rotation is anything that's really, really good now outside of Scapeshift, although I think the deck will still be around, just the power level of the deck goes away because Scapeshift rotates. Field of the Dead is really good, and I think that deck will still be around. You have Golos that basically takes the spot of that, or of Scapeshift. Also, there's a Sam Blacklist that came out that he wrote about that basically jams the Simic ramp idea, Bant ramp, whatever you want to use, and the Scapeshift deck, and jams them together and says, here, play this with Nexus. Still plays a Boreal Grazer, which I think is just it's going to replace Llanowar Elf, but I just can't get over the fact that some decks still play this card. It does block Thief of Sanity, but no one really plays that anymore because Teferi is really, really good against it. You're playing a 3-drop that doesn't do anything when it hits the table, and bouncing it is really good, and it's basically time-walking your opponent, and that's why no one really plays Thief of Sanity anymore. You're usually playing your 2 mana or 2 converted casting cost hate spells like Noxious Grasp, Aether Gust, and stuff like that. So keep in mind also that Mono Red loses a lot, mainly Goblin Chain Whirler and Fanatical Firebrand, and there's a couple others. Lightning Strike also. So I'm not saying Mono Red is dead, and Mono Red it moved from tier 1 to tier 2, almost tier 3 in the span of 1 week. It just has a really, really hard time with Cerulean Drake. Likewise, Mono Blue, the reason why you don't see it much is because the deck can't deal with Shifting Ceratops. Simic Flash is another deck that popped up and was doing really well, and then most of the time Flash decks, once you know how to deal with it, or once you know what the lists are, you know how to play around them and play around counter spells and know when to pick your spots and play their game. Shifting Ceratops is okay against them, but Veil of Summer is really where you want to be at with Flash strategies. And also, if you have a problem or see a lot of Flash strategy in your meta, just play Teferi. It just stops that real quick. As I said, I play the Simic ramp deck. I made a couple of changes. The only thing that I changed out of the main is cutting 1 Tamiyo for a Drawn from Dreams. It's kind of a hedge that at one point you sometimes need to find 2 things at once as opposed to just 1. And in the sideboard, I cut 2 Cerulean Drake and a Aether Gust for 3 Shifting Ceratops because I've seen a lot of blue decks and Scapeshift on Arena. Although Orzhov Vampires and Jund Dinosaurs are really, really hard matchup, but you can't plan for everything. But for rotation, pick up all the big name stuff from M20 and War of the Spark. Nissa is still going to be around. Field of the Dead, Chandra, all the Chandras, I think it'll be fine. And get rid of all of your stuff that's rotating, unless of course you just like using it till the day it's over. Essentially, that's what I would be doing, and I probably would continue. Oh, and get all of the Cavaliers, mainly the blue, the green, and the white one. I'm not sure about Cavalier Knight, the black one. It seems to be really powerful, but we just haven't found a spot for it yet. It competes really, really hard with Bantu. So if that were played, and there's not really too many aristocrat strategies out right now, and if they are, it's tier 2 at best. Tier 1 strategies are really, really proactive, but also non-interactive, though their creatures are really good. So, but standard is great, albeit I used to have a problem, albeit Teferi. I used to have a problem with Narset, but ever since Risen Reef was printed, Narset's not a problem because there's no way to before M20 there was no way to draw cards, and today, there was no way to draw cards other than drawing cards. Now you got Drawn from Dreams and Risen Reef, and that allows you to circumvent Narset, and Narset's not as punishing, and that's why I think Esper has a hard time, is because usually the way Esper played out was they'd play Teferi or they play Narset, and if they have both, then it's really hard for you to draw cards and also interact with your opponent. Now you have a way to interact with them in the sense that you can just out card advantage them by playing Risen Reef. Then turn 4, you play Leafkin Druid, and then and that's drawing you cards or laying lands out. So if they decide to bounce your stuff or deal with your Risen Reef, that's a 2-for-1 or a replacement, a 1-for-1. So which 3 mana replace yourself or play a land is really good. And if you get your Temple of Mystery from it or a temple, which are really good, you should be playing temples and pick them all up, because once the rotation, these are the lands that are going to be played. And I can see a Throne of Eldraine giving us the other 5 temples for the buddy colors: blue white, green white, blue black, and black red, and stuff like that. But those were I know that Commander the Commander decks are being spoiled and you're getting a deck each day, but I wanted to tackle the entirety of the Commander release, or the pre-release, of the spoilers, and then go through what deck I actually like, as opposed to like going through all the cards. And then once I get all of that and get to it, and that's when it'll be a part of the actual cast, which will start hopefully really, really soon. But like I said, there's the pilot. But let's get to a couple of questions that were sent in to me as I requested for some mail. These are Magic related. The first question, both of these are from the same person, a friend on Facebook. David Schmuck sends, what are reasons to mulligan? I'm going to use my own experiences with Simic Ramp for this. Usually when you mulligan in general, it's because you don't have your typical plays for your deck. In other words, if mono red has 5 lands and 2 spells, usually burn decks or really, really hyper aggressive decks don't want more than 3 or 4 lands at a time. Similarly, in Simic Ramp, you want your turn 1 Llanowar Elf or a turn 2 ramp spell. I'm mulliganing most of my hands, especially with the new London mulligan rule. A lot of the times when I don't have a turn 1 Llanowar Elf or a turn 2 Growth Spiral or Leafkin Druid. Usually, most of the time, if I don't have Llanowar Elf or I don't have Growth Spiral, I'm mulliganing my hand. If I have a Leafkin Druid, I'm most likely to keep if I have Risen Reef. But again, in the blind, I'm typically mulliganing my hand. Usually that is when you're mulliganing is because your land to spell ratio isn't great, or if you're on the play and your deck needs lands in the sense that you're functioning on 4, 5, and 6 mana, and you only start with 2 in your hand, and you're on the play, typically you're mulliganing, especially if you don't have any cantrips to filter your draws and draw lands. But that also depends on what your deck is, and if you know it, and you know what you're doing, you can pick and choose, but it depends on your level of play. Mostly for beginners and intermediate that haven't been playing very long, I would strongly suggest that if you're not starting with 3 to 4 lands in your hand, outside of hyper aggressive decks, if you're just playing mid range, that's typically where the start is. You want to, if it's not 3 to 4 lands, as I said, you just mulligan the hand and start over. And with the London Mulligan rule, it's a lot easier to find land. So, and it doesn't feel as bad when you mulligan to 5 or 6. This week, I was playing a match with Simic Ramp against Simic Flash, and I mulled the 4 on the draw and won that game. So you can win games while mulling, and my hand was Temple, Forest, Llanowar Elf, and Risen Reef. That was my hand, and I pitched away whatever, but I mulliganed a lot. And usually I'm mulliganing to 6 with a hand, unless I have, like I said, Llanowar Elf or Growth Spirals. The second question, how do I determine how many and which type of lands to put in my deck? Last year in 2018, when Guilds of Ravnica came out, Frank Cartson wrote an article or an update to his mana curve or his mana proportion math formula that he writes about. He started writing about it in 2013, I think, and he's written 2 articles since then. If you haven't read it, you should, because that basically teaches you mana sources and how many you need to cast all your spells at a relative time and on time. For example, if you have, say, a spell that you want to cast, and it's a Llanowar Elf, for example, you want to have minimum 14 untapped green sources on turn 1. That means 14 forests, because they come into play on tap on turn 1, or 14 shock lands that tap for a green source. So that would be 4 stomping grounds, 4 breeding pools, 4 overgrown tombs, and 2 temple gardens, for example. That's 14 untapped green sources. If you have Vraska's Contempt, 2 black, 2 colorless, that's 16 black sources on turn 4. So if you have a ramp spell, usually counts as 1, except Growth Spiral, that's a cantrip, so that's a half. But your Grow from the Ashes, Gift of Paradise, stuff like that, usually considers a full mana source because it taps for. How do you determine how many of which types of lands? Usually you want to start with your color fixing in the sense of what your main plan is or what your deck is. So for example, if you're running a 3-color deck, what is the most of what color you're playing? So if you're playing Grixis, are you playing mostly black spells, blue spells, red spells? Which one? Once you figure out how many of which color you're playing, and you can usually tell by what all of your spells do, Grixis is mostly a black splashing or black and blue splashing red, sometimes black and red splashing blue, but mostly it's blue-black splashing red. So a lot of your lands are going to tap for black, most likely, especially now that Nicol Bolas cost 3 black sources, 1 blue, 1 red. You want a minimum of 19 black sources on turn 5. So that cuts a lot of your blue and red lands out in the sense that you're going to play a lot less of them. That also means that you have to play a lot less Narsets and a lot of less double-colored spells because you have to make sure that you're playing enough black sources. This also allows you to play more temples as opposed to playing the check lands, so that it allows you to filter your draws to draw the lands that you need. Now, this all hinges on what your deck is trying to do. Typically, you want to start with obviously your duels. So if you're playing a 3-color deck and you can afford it, most of the time you're going to be playing the lands that are the easiest to play, which are for the standard event, the standard format, your shock lands. Those are the best lands that are not basic. So you're going to play all 4 of them if we're using Grixis as an example. So you're going to use your 4 Watery Graves and 4 Blood Crypts, and then we go from there. Obviously, you can play Steam Vents. However, that's 12 shock lands. And if you're not playing as many blue and red spells, you might want to cut back on those and start at 2. But you can start at 4. It's not a big deal. And go from there. Me personally, when I build decks, that's where I start. Is I build the deck with the idea, and then I figure out the mana afterward. So when I was doing the Simic ramp, obviously I took the list from Brad Nelson, and then is there any way that I can change the mana sources, or can I add more stuff? And a lot of ramp decks play 25 lands, especially the Bant ramp decks. I personally feel that you should be playing 26, and that allows you one extra mana source. And if you're playing Growth Spiral, you shouldn't be playing any less than 26. If you're playing Ops, you can play 25. And once I know that I can, especially if you're 2-color deck, you can obviously play four shock lands and your 4 check lands. And then how many of the temples do I want to play? Well, I play 3, some play 2. You don't want too many tap lands, unless, of course, your deck is suited for that. For example, Bant Scapeshift plays a lot of tap land. A lot of the lands come into play tapped. So it just depends on what your deck is doing. And the reason why their lands and Scapeshifts into play tapped is because they need a different land or different types of lands based on Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead changes the dynamic of your deck, meaning that you have to run different lands of different names of different types, 7 of them to make the land work. And if you don't have them and you don't have enough, then the chances of you getting the payoff of what the lands do is very slim. And also, Frank Carson has articles about percentages and probabilities. He's a mathematician, was a pro player, and he's got articles on that. All of his articles are written on channelfireball.com. They are not sponsoring me, but that's where his articles are. You need to check them out. You can Google them, Frank Carson Mana, and that article of Guilds of Ravnica was written in 2008, I think in March or May. And that'll come up and you can read it. It's really long and very descriptive and informative. But that's all the questions I have. And as I said, this is the pilot episode of how I want to run things. If you have any suggestions or any ideas to go with it, please send them to me at either my Facebook, my Twitter, or my email at asrielthegreat@hotmail.com, and I'll see what I can do with it. I know one thing that I want to add is to add in music, but I don't want any royalties or anything crazy happening, so I got to find something that I can use that won't be like, oh man, that's my song, and I want royalties from that. So that's something that I want to get to. But until then, this is me signing off, and I will see you guys next time, hopefully in a few days or in a week's time, so I can actually start getting these casts on a regular time frame. So until then, I will see you guys next time, and thanks for listening.